On the night of her daughter's graduation, Bianca Caldwell stood smiling on stage, just moments before discovering her husband's shocking betrayal, broadcast live to the entire audience. What followed wasn't heartbreak. It was a masterclass in revenge, power, and rebirth. This is the story of how a betrayed wife became a corporate queen and burned her enemies without ever lifting a match. The restaurant glowed with warm lighting and soft chatter, the kind of upscale venue my family had always preferred for special occasions. Tonight was my father's 70th birthday, and the long table set for 15 reflected the extravagance he had always equated with success. I stood for a moment at the entrance, scanning the room. Everyone was already seated, except me. A hostess approached with a forced smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for the Marshall party," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated. "And your name?" "Stephanie Marshall." She blinked, visibly surprised. "Oh, of course. Right this way." I followed her across the floor, acutely aware of the eyes trailing behind me. When I reached the table, the conversation halted. My mother's eyes widened, my brother Thomas raised an eyebrow, and my sister Diana, ever the gatekeeper of family appearances, looked like she'd tasted something sour. "Stephanie," my father said, standing to greet me. His smile was hesitant. "You made it." "Of course," I said, offering him a hug. "Happy birthday, Dad." He nodded, already moving back to his seat. There was a flicker of surprise on his face, though. I had dressed carefully, elegantly but understated. A tailored black dress, simple diamond studs, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of walking into boardrooms where no one expected much until I started speaking. The only person who didn't seem caught off guard was the security guard at the entrance, who had recognized me as I entered. "Ms. Marshall, big fan of your work with Learning Bridge. My niece's school just got your literacy program. Changed her life." I had smiled and thanked him, heart swelling at the mention of the nonprofit I had founded 5 years ago, an organization that developed educational software for underfunded schools across the country. But I hadn't come here to talk about my work. I had come to honor my father, or at least that's what I told myself. As I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, the conversation resumed, slightly stilted now. Diana leaned across her husband to speak to Thomas. "Did you know she was coming?" she whispered. "Of course not." I pretended not to hear. I sipped my wine, listening as they discussed vacations, real estate, and the rising value of their investments. "So, what are you up to these days?" Thomas finally asked, feigning casual interest. "Still managing that bookstore?" Diana added, her tone dipped in condescension. I smiled politely. "Something like that." Technically, I had once worked part-time at an independent bookstore after leaving my job at a major consulting firm. But that was years ago. I had kept my professional life private, not out of shame, but because I had no desire to explain myself to people who measured worth by title and income. The waiter arrived to take our orders. Diana asked about the evening's specials with practiced elegance. I noticed her positioning herself next to one of my father's wealthiest clients, clearly trying to network. Thomas was doing the same on the other side of the table. Old habits. Die hard. "So, Stephanie," Diana said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "tell everyone about your company. I've always been so proud of my successful sister." I raised an eyebrow at her. Just an hour ago, she had been physically blocking me from entering this very room. "Yes, do tell us," Thomas chimed in. "I always knew you were up to something impressive." "All. That secrecy. So mysterious." He gave a forced laugh. My mother was already regaling the woman next to her with an entirely fictional account of how she had always supported Stephanie's entrepreneurial spirit. "She gets it from me, you know," she was saying. "I always encouraged her to think outside the box." The entire scene was surreal. The same people who had been embarrassed by my presence were now trying to bask in my reflected success. The transformation would have been comical if it weren't so painfully transparent. Throughout the appetizer course, I answered questions about Learning Bridge politely but briefly. Yes, I had founded it 5 years ago. Yes, it provided educational software to underfunded schools. No, I had not sought publicity for my role. As the main course was served, several business associates from nearby tables stopped by to greet me. One was a major investor in educational technology. Another ran a foundation that had partnered with Learning Bridge on several projects. Each interaction seemed to physically pain my siblings, who were realizing just how connected and respected I was in circles they had been trying to break into for years. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" my father finally asked during a lull in the conversation. It was the first direct question he had asked me all evening. The table fell silent, everyone suddenly interested in my answer. I set down my fork and looked around at the expectant faces of my family. The moment of confrontation had arrived, and despite my resolution to take the high road, I knew I needed to be honest. "I didn't tell you because it wouldn't have mattered," I said quietly. "Not in the way that should matter between family members." "What do you mean?" my mother asked, looking genuinely confused. "Of course it would have mattered. We would have been so proud." "That's exactly my point," I replied. "You're proud. Now because I'm successful by your standards. But for years, when you thought I was just managing a bookstore, did you ever ask me if I was happy? Did you ever show interest in my life or my choices?" Diana shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "We were concerned about you. We wanted more for you." "No," I said firmly. "You wanted me to be more like you. There's a difference." I turned to my father. "Dad, do you remember when I was 12 and won the state writing competition? My story was published in a magazine, and I was so excited to show you. But that was the same day Diana got accepted to Harvard, and no one even remembered to go to the awards ceremony." My father looked down at his plate, a flash of guilt crossing his face. "Or when I made honor roll every semester in high school. But it was never celebrated because Thomas was in medical school, and that was real achievement." "We were just pushing you to reach your potential," my mother interjected. "No, you were teaching me that my worth was tied to a very specific kind of success," I countered. "When I left corporate America to pursue something I believed in, something that would make a difference, you all treated me like I had failed. The only metric that mattered to any of you was money and status." Diana's face hardened. "So you lied to us for years? You let us believe you were struggling financially while you were secretly building some tech empire? How is that not manipulative?" "I didn't lie," I said. "I just didn't volunteer information. I wanted to know if you could respect me and my choices without the validation of wealth. I wanted to be valued for who I am, not what I've accomplished or acquired." "That's not fair," Thomas argued. "You set us up to fail a test we didn't know we were taking." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But think about it. Would we be having this conversation if the security guard hadn't recognized me? Would I even be sitting at this table, or would I be alone at the bar, excluded from my own father's birthday because I didn't look successful enough?" The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. I looked around at the faces of my family members, seeing the defensiveness, the embarrassment, and in some cases, the beginning glimmers of genuine reflection. "I don't want an apology," I said. "And I'm not trying to ruin Dad's birthday. I just want you all to understand that the way we've related to each other as a family has been broken for a long time. Tonight just made it impossible to ignore anymore." My father cleared his throat. "Stephanie, would you join me on the terrace for a moment? I think we need to talk privately." As we stood to leave the table, I noticed the mixture of emotions on my siblings' faces. Diana looked defensive and angry, but also confused, as if her worldview had been challenged in a way she couldn't immediately dismiss. Thomas appeared calculating at first, but there was something else there too. A hint of genuine introspection that I hadn't seen from him in years. My mother simply looked lost, her social script for the evening completely disrupted. For once, she didn't have a ready comment or a practiced smile to deploy. I followed my father to the private terrace, unsure of what would come next, but feeling, for the first time in years, that something real might finally be said between us. The days that followed the graduation debacle blurred into a haunting haze for Bianca. She had moved into her friend Camilla's guest house, an ivy-covered brick cottage tucked behind a sprawling maple tree, peaceful and detached from the world. But no matter how many candles she lit or how many times she journaled her heartbreak, the betrayal still pulsed like a second heartbeat. Her phone rang constantly. Gregory, Cassandra, even reporters sniffing around the edges of the scandal like vultures circling a carcass. But Bianca didn't answer. She had nothing left to say. Bianca had always prided herself on her resilience. The poised corporate wife who'd kept the family spotless, the woman who had once turned a failing PR firm into a boutique powerhouse of image restoration. Now she was the one whose image was fractured. But somewhere in that fracture, strength simmered, and revenge whispered. A week after the graduation, Bianca stood in the marble-lined foyer of her old home, Gregory's mansion now, cold and sterile, as ever. She wasn't there for a confrontation. Not yet. She was there for her daughter. Celine met her at the door, eyes rimmed with sadness. "Mom," she whispered, pulling her into a long, tearful hug. "You didn't deserve any of this." Bianca cupped her daughter's cheek. "Neither did you." Upstairs, she collected a few keepsakes, photo albums, her mother's rosary, a first-edition poetry book her father gave her at 16. As she passed Gregory's study, the door was ajar. Inside, Cassandra stood barefoot, wearing Gregory's shirt, talking softly on the phone. "No, she's still a threat. Her contacts, her reputation. We need to keep her quiet. Gregory thinks I'm overreacting, but you know how messy she can get when cornered." Bianca's breath caught in her throat. She had known there was more to this. Cassandra wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a planner, a strategist, and she wasn't alone. Bianca backed away before Cassandra noticed her. So, it wasn't just an affair. It was a coup. 2 weeks later, Bianca walked into Anderson & West PR Group, the company she had co-founded with Gregory in the early years of their marriage, only to be sidelined quietly when Celine was born. Legally, her name was still on many foundational documents. Emotionally, she'd left it long ago, but not anymore. She met with one of the firm's original legal advisors, Arthur Briggs, an old, gray-eyed man who had always liked her more than Gregory. Over bitter coffee in his book-lined office, Arthur flipped through a dusty file. "Your shares weren't fully bought out," he said, adjusting his glasses. "He lied to you. You're still a minority stakeholder, 15% in fact. And with Cassandra having no equity and Gregory already under scrutiny for, well, let's call it moral misjudgment, you have leverage." Bianca smiled slowly. "Let's make it count." Bianca moved like a queen plotting in exile. She gathered allies, former employees who'd been driven out when Gregory restructured the company under Cassandra's influence. She met with investigative journalists under aliases, feeding them carefully curated details of financial irregularities. She leaked internal memos anonymously and fed rumors to clients about executive instability. And she waited for Gregory to reach his boiling point. He didn't disappoint. One evening, she received a formal couriered invitation, a reconciliation dinner at the Wexley Club, one of Manhattan's most exclusive private venues. Gregory wanted a truce, or thought. He did. Bianca arrived in a midnight blue gown, hair swept into a chignon, eyes lined like daggers. Gregory was already there, seated beside Cassandra, who wore an ivory dress too bridal for comfort. Gregory rose. "Bianca, thank you for coming." Bianca didn't shake his hand. She sat down. "Let's skip the pleasantries." Gregory cleared his throat. "Look, what happened was ugly. I made mistakes. We both did." Cassandra smiled sweetly. "We just want peace, Bianca." Bianca turned to Cassandra, voice velvet over steel. "I heard your phone call. The one where you called me a threat. You really should close your doors when you plot a woman's silence." Gregory's jaw tensed. Bianca continued. "You've both made your move, but I'm not backing down." Gregory leaned forward. "You're bitter." "No," Bianca said, coolly. "I'm awake." She stood up, dropping a sealed envelope on the table. "You might want to have your legal team look that over. It outlines my intent to reclaim my shares, file for breach of fiduciary duty, and expose irregularities in recent executive payouts, particularly the ones funneled to Cassandra via consulting loopholes." Cassandra paled. Bianca leaned in. "You thought you could destroy me quietly. But you forgot the one rule of war." She smiled. "Don't start a fire unless you're ready to burn." The next morning, headlines exploded across business news sites. Anderson and West co-founder launches. Legal action. Allegations of fraud, nepotism, and boardroom betrayal. Clients began pulling out. Stockholders demanded meetings. The board, once Gregory's fortress, was now a battlefield. Cassandra's name became radioactive. Inside the office, chaos reigned. Bianca didn't even have to step into the building. She just watched it crumble. In the middle of it all, Bianca kept one promise sacred: her daughter. One rainy evening, Celine came to her, teary-eyed. "Dad says you're destroying him." Bianca stroked her hair. "He destroyed our family the moment he chose ambition over honesty." "But he's still my father." Bianca nodded slowly. "And I'll never ask you to choose, but I will ask you to see things clearly." She handed Celine a folder. Inside were photos. Not just of the affair, but of secret overseas accounts. Payments made to hush former employees. One woman's resignation letter after harassment from Gregory's executive team. All buried. "Truth is heavy," Bianca said. "But silence is heavier." By the end of the quarter, Gregory was forced to step down voluntarily. Cassandra vanished from the firm's public affairs page. Bianca, through strategic partnerships and quiet board alliances, reclaimed a partial leadership role, not to run the firm full-time, but to steer it from behind the scenes, and more importantly, to restructure it into something that no longer mirrored Gregory's ambition, but her own integrity. She wasn't just building back her life, she was building a legacy. 1 month later, she met Gregory for a court-mandated mediation. He looked older, like the scandal had aged him a decade. He tried to speak. Bianca held up a hand. "I don't want your apologies." He looked up, wounded. "Then what do you want?" She rose from her seat, gathering her documents. "I want you to live with the knowledge that the woman you dismissed as collateral was the one who buried your empire." The courtroom's fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Bianca sat perfectly still, her silk blouse crisp, her face unreadable. Across from her, Gregory slouched in a charcoal suit, eyes hollowed out by sleepless nights and media firestorms. The scandal had taken its toll on his company, his fortune, and perhaps most poetically, his pride. Cassandra, conspicuously absent. She had fled weeks ago. After Bianca's legal team exposed shell companies used to funnel firm assets into personal luxury accounts, including a French villa registered under Cassandra's name, the board demanded a formal investigation. She was advised to take an extended leave. Her departure was not mourned. Gregory, stripped of his CEO title, now faced civil penalties and financial scrutiny. He no longer walked into boardrooms with swagger. Now he shuffled into depositions with lawyers at his side. Bianca had done what few believed possible. She had dismantled him. But power had never been her goal. Truth was. When the final gavel came down, the settlement agreement awarded Bianca a restored 25% stake in Anderson and West, a public acknowledgement of her founding contributions, and a multi-million-dollar restitution for damages. But what she valued more was the clause that mandated Gregory's full withdrawal from the firm for 10 years. No advisory roles, no shadow management, no loopholes. He was exiled from the kingdom he thought he ruled. And now the queen had returned. Not to rebuild his empire, but to redefine her own. A week later, Bianca stood at a podium, facing a room packed with journalists, investors, and former colleagues. Cameras flashed. Microphones lined the table like sentinels. She took a breath. "I am not here today as the ex-wife of Gregory West. I am not here as the victim of betrayal. I stand here as a woman who refused to be erased." There was silence. Respectful, awestruck. "This firm will undergo a transformation, not just in leadership, but in values. We will implement equity-focused hiring practices, transparency in executive pay, and zero tolerance for misconduct at any level. I built this company once, and now I rebuild it better." She didn't wait for applause. She turned, stepping away with quiet grace and thunderous strength. The wounds that fade, the scars that guide back at Camilla's guest house, Bianca sat, in the sunlit garden with Celine. The air smelled of jasmine and lavender. The lawsuit was over, the revenge complete. Now, there was only life. Do you regret it? Celine asked, pouring her mother a glass of iced tea. Bianca looked up. Which part? The war, the exposure, the fire you started. Bianca smiled faintly, not bitterly. I didn't start the fire, sweetheart. I just refused to burn in it. Celine reached into her tote bag and handed over a folder. Inside, an application to Columbia Law School. Bianca blinked. You applied? Celine nodded. You inspired me. You showed me that no one should let others write their story. I want to help women like you, like us, rewrite theirs. Tears glimmered in Bianca's eyes. Not from pain this time, but pride. Your story will be powerful, she whispered. Celine grinned. It already is. 6 months later, the legacy. Reclaimed Bianca stood before a sleek glass building, sunlight dancing off its facade. The brass sign read, Bianca Caldwell Strategies, Image, Integrity, Impact. She had launched her own firm, one rooted not in appearances, but in authenticity. It didn't just help brands rebuild reputations, it helped people reclaim narratives. Inside, her team buzzed with energy. Young professionals, many from marginalized backgrounds, all drawn by Bianca's mission. She walked through the main corridor, nodding as interns waved and associates updated her on media analytics. Her assistant handed her the morning brief. Oh, and Celine called, the assistant added. Said her first moot court competition is next week. Bianca smiled. Tell her I'll be in the front row. That night, Bianca sat on her balcony, wine glass in hand, city lights stretching endlessly before her. The skyline was like her journey. Sharp, luminous, full of jagged triumphs and glowing resilience. She had lost her husband. She had nearly lost her identity. But she had found something far greater, herself. No longer defined by Gregory's shadow. No longer stained by Cassandra's poison, Bianca was free. Not vindictive, not vengeful. Just free. And in that freedom, she had built something no scandal could shake. A legacy born from ashes and reimagined with fire.